They found the bodies in the spring, frozen hard to the earth, but the legend of what happened at Hollow Creek Station didn't melt with the snow. In 1874, a solitary widow named Leora Corwin did the unthinkable. She didn't just survive the Texas winter, she intervened in a slaughter. She pulled a terrified boy from the jaws of a starving wolf pack, unaware that the wolves were the least of her problems. Because when the sun went down that evening, the horizon didn't turn black. It turned into a wall of painted muscle and iron. 50 Comanche warriors, a circle of death, and they weren't there to negotiate. This is the story of the night the West held its breath. The wind came off the Caprock Escarpment like a razor dragged across a strop. It was late November in the Texas Panhandle, 1874, a year that had already chewed up and spat out better people than Leora Corwin. Leora stood on the porch of the Hollow Creek way station, a Winchester 1873 resting in the crook of her arm. She wasn't expecting guests. The stagecoach from Fort Griffin wasn't due for another 3 days, and the sky to the north was bruising a deep, ugly purple, a blue norther, coming down to freeze the marrow in the bones of the unprepared. She adjusted her shawl, the wool rough against her neck. At 42, Leora was built of wire and rawhide. She had buried a husband who died of gangrene and a son who died of a horse kick. The territory had taken everything it could take from her, leaving her with a silence she had learned to wear like armor. She was about to turn back inside to stoke the potbelly stove when the sound cut through the gale. It wasn't the wind. It was a high-pitched, jagged scream. Leora didn't hesitate. She racked the lever of the Winchester, the metallic clack-clack distinct in the freezing air, and stepped off the porch. The sound had come from the creek bed, about 200 yards past the scrub oak line. She moved with the practiced gait of a hunter, keeping her profile low. As she crested the ridge overlooking the dried-out creek, the scene below stopped her cold. It was a kill circle. 5 timber wolves, their coats matted with burrs and mud, were tightening a noose around a dead cottonwood tree. They were gaunt, their ribs showing through winter coats, desperate animals, driven mad by the early freeze. But they weren't hunting a deer. Pressed into the V-shape of the cottonwood split trunk was a child, a boy, no older than 8. He was small, his skin the color of polished copper, his long black hair whipping across his face. He held a broken branch in one hand, thrusting it feebly at the snapping jaws of the alpha, a massive male with a scar running down its muzzle. The boy was Comanche. Leora knew the markings on the deerskin tunic, torn though it was. The alpha lunged. The boy screamed again, swinging the stick, but the wood snapped against the wolf's skull. The beast didn't even flinch. It recoiled, crouched, and prepared for the killing leap. Leora raised the rifle. The distance was 70 yards. The wind was gusting left to right. She didn't think about the politics of the Red River War. She didn't think about the raids reported in the Galveston News. She saw a child, and she saw a monster. Leora exhaled, paused at the bottom of the breath, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle was deafening. The alpha wolf dropped mid-spring. A hole punched clean through its shoulder. The pack scattered instantly, confused by the thunder that had no lightning. Leora worked the lever. Clack-clack. She put a second round into the dirt inches from a grey female that lingered too long. The dirt spray sent the animal yelping toward the brush. "Get away!" Leora screamed, her voice raw. "Go on!" The pack broke. They vanished into the grey scrub as quickly as smoke in a gale. Leora scrambled down the embankment, her boots skidding on the frozen shale. She approached the tree slowly, rifle lowered, but ready. The boy had slid down into the dirt. He was curled into a ball, shaking so violently His teeth clattered like dice in a cup. "It's all right," Leora said, her voice dropping to the low, steady tone she used for spooked horses. "They're gone." The boy looked up. His eyes were wide, black pools of absolute terror. But as Leora got closer, she saw something that made her stomach turn over. The boy wasn't just shaking from the cold or the wolves. There were rope burns on his wrists, raw, red, and angry. And around his left ankle, a heavy iron shackle trailed a broken length of chain. He hadn't wandered off from a tribe. He had escaped. Leora knelt, reaching out a hand. The boy flinched, scrambling backward until his back hit the tree bark. He bared his teeth, a feral, cornered sound escaping his throat. "I ain't gonna hurt you," Leora said firmly. She slung the rifle over her shoulder to show her hands were empty. "But if you stay out here, the cold or the cousins of those dogs will finish you before midnight. Come on." She saw the exact moment the boy's adrenaline failed. His eyes rolled back, and he slumped sideways into the snow. Leora cursed softly. She scooped him up. He weighed almost nothing, light as a bundle of dry kindling, and began the trudge back up the hill. The snow was starting to fall now, fat, heavy flakes that promised to bury the world. She didn't know who had put irons on a child, but she knew that whoever did it was worse than the wolves. And she had a sinking feeling they were still out there, looking for their property. The cabin at Hollow Creek was built from rough-hewn pine logs, chinked with mud and straw that had hardened to the consistency of stone. It was a fortress against the elements, but that night it felt fragile. Leora laid the boy on the quilt-covered cot near the stove. The heat of the room was intense compared to the outside, smelling of wood smoke, coffee, and drying sage. She lit a second coal oil lamp, the yellow light pushing back the shadows in the corners. She worked quickly. She used a warm, wet cloth to clean the grime from the boy's face. He was unconscious, likely from shock and hypothermia. As she cleaned him, the narrative of his last few days was written on his skin. He was covered in bruises. Some were fresh, blooming purple and yellow. Others were older, green and fading. The shackle on his ankle was a crude thing, likely a modified handcuff used for transporting prisoners. It had chafed the skin down to the meat. Leora went to her heavy oak chest at the foot of her bed and retrieved a small key ring. Her husband, Thomas, had been a blacksmith before he tried his hand at ranching. He kept tools for everything. It took her 10 minutes of careful maneuvering with a file and a pry bar to snap the locking mechanism of the shackle. When the iron clattered to the floor, the boy gasped in his sleep, his legs twitching as if running a dream race. Leora tossed the iron into the corner. She brewed a poultice of comfrey and fat to pack the wound, wrapping it in clean linen strips. "Who are you?" she whispered, looking at his sharp features. He was high-born. She could tell by the moccasins he wore, beaded with intricate blue and white patterns, stitching that took months to complete. This wasn't a straggler. This was the son of someone important. A heavy thud against the door made Leora spin around, the Colt Navy revolver from the table instantly in her hand. "Hello, the house!" a voice bellowed. It wasn't a friendly greeting. It was the demand of a man who felt he owned the ground he stood on. Leora moved to the window, peering through the crack in the shutter. 3 men sat on horseback in the yard. The snow was falling harder now, coating their dusters in white. She recognized the lead rider immediately. Thaddeus Holt. Holt was a land agent based out of Tascosa, but that was just a title. In reality, he was a vulture who swooped in when ranchers went bust, buying land for pennies and selling it to the railroads for gold. He was a big man, heavy in the gut, with a beard that hid a weak chin and eyes that had no shine to them. Leora cracked the door 2 inches. "I'm closed for the season, Holt. You know that." "Now, Leora," Holt shouted over the wind, his horse shifting beneath him. "That ain't neighborly. We're looking for lost stock. Wondered if you'd seen anything." "I haven't seen any stray cattle," Leora lied smoothly. Holt chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Not cattle, darling. A buck. A little one. Run off from my transport wagon about 5 miles east. He's dangerous. Feral. Need to get him back before he hurts himself." Leora's grip on the door tightened. Transport wagon. Holt was running a slave trade, or worse, ransoming captives. "Haven't seen him," Leora said, her voice flat. "Wolves are out, though. Saw a pack by the creek. If he's out there, he's dead." Holt stared at the door. He couldn't see inside, but Leora felt his gaze like a physical weight. He looked at the chimney smoke, then down at the ground. The fresh snow was covering her tracks, but not fast enough. He could probably see the drag marks where she'd carried the boy. "Wolves," Holt repeated. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the snow. "Well, that's a shame. That boy was worth a significant amount of consideration from the government." He signaled to his men. "If he turns up, Leora, you hold him. I'll pay $50 for his head, $100 for him alive." "Get off my land, Holt," Leora said. Holt tipped his hat, a mockery of chivalry. "Stay warm, Widow Corwin." They rode off, but not far. Leora watched them crest the hill and stop. They were setting up camp just beyond the tree line. They didn't believe her. They would wait for morning, and then they would come back and tear the cabin apart. Leora bolted the door. She dragged the heavy oak table in front of it. She went back to the boy. He was awake. He was staring at her, his eyes clear now. He didn't look like a child anymore. He looked like a warrior, shrunk down to a small frame. He looked at the door, then at Leora. He understood. "They are bad men," Leora said, pointing to the door. The boy said nothing. He pointed to the fire, then made a circle motion with his hand. "Circle?" Leora asked. He shook his head. He pointed to the window. Leora walked over and looked out again. The sun had fully set. The world was blue-black and freezing. At first, she thought it was just the shadows of the scrub oaks moving in the wind. But then, a shadow detached itself from the tree line. Then another, and another. They were silent. They moved without bobbing up and down, gliding over the snow crust. Leora's breath hitched. She blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, lit only by the red glow of the stove embers. She hurried to the other window. More shadows. "Lord Almighty," she whispered. They weren't Holt's men. They weren't the army. They were Comanche. Quahadi band, by the look of the paint. Black stripes across the eyes, red ochre on the chests of the horses. They carried lances and Winchester repeaters. There were dozens of them. They had formed a perfect ring around the cabin, standing just out of rifle range, motionless as statues in the falling snow. The boy let out a small sound. Not fear. Recognition. Leora looked at him. "Your people." The boy nodded slowly. He whispered one word, a name that made Leora's blood run cold. Iron Shirt. Iron Shirt was a war chief of legend. The newspapers called him a ghost. The army called him a butcher. He was known for leaving no survivors. Leora realized then the gravity of her position. She was trapped in a wooden box. On one side, barely a mile away, was Thaddeus Holt and his hired guns, waiting to snatch the boy. On the other side, surrounding her completely, was the most feared war party in the territory, and she had the chief's son. If she gave the boy to the warriors, Holt would likely shoot her for losing his prize. If she kept the boy, the warriors would burn the cabin down with her inside. But there was something else. The warriors weren't attacking. They were waiting. They had formed the circle. In Comanche culture, Leora knew, A circle wasn't always a siege. Sometimes it was a courtroom. She looked at the boy. "Can you walk?" He nodded, wincing as he put weight on his bad ankle. Leora grabbed her coat and checked the load in her Winchester. She grabbed a box of shells and shoved them into her pocket. "We ain't hiding under the bed," Leora said, more to herself than him. "If I'm gonna die tonight, I'm gonna die standing on my own porch." She moved the table away from the door. "Stay behind me," she ordered. Leora threw the bolt and kicked the door open. The wind howled into the room, swirling the snow around her skirts. She stepped out onto the porch, the rifle held across her chest, not aimed, but ready. The circle of warriors didn't flinch. A single rider separated from the darkness and walked his horse forward. He wore a buffalo horn headdress that added 2 feet to his height. His face was a map of scars and paint. He stopped 10 yards from the porch. The horse blew steam from its nostrils. Leora stood her ground. "I have the boy!" she shouted over the wind. "He is safe!" The rider, iron shirt, stared at her. He didn't look at the boy peeking from behind her skirts. He looked only at Leora. He raised a lance, pointing it directly at her heart. Then he stabbed it into the snow, leaving it standing upright. It was a challenge. He spoke then, his voice deep and carrying easily over the wind. He spoke in broken English, heavy and thick. "The wolves did not eat him. You did not kill him. But the night is long, woman of iron hair." He gestured to the darkness behind him. "The bluecoats and the fat man, Holt, are coming. They smell the smoke. Tonight, we do not fight you. Tonight, we see if you are worth the air you breathe. Defend the child. If he lives until sunrise, we will talk. If he dies, you die slowly." Iron Shirt pulled his horse back. The warriors didn't leave. They didn't attack. They simply turned their horses outward. They weren't besieging her. They were guarding the perimeter against Holt. But they were leaving the inner circle to her. They were forcing her to be the boy's protector against the men who were coming to take him. It was a test, a gauntlet. Leora looked toward the ridge where Holt's camp was. She saw the flicker of torches moving. Holt had seen the Indians. He was coming, panic and greed driving him. Leora looked at the lance vibrating in the wind. She looked at the terrified boy. "Get inside," she said, her voice turning to steel, "and load the scattergun." The night had just begun. The silence that followed Iron Shirt's proclamation was heavier than the snow. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the smell of old pine resin and the sharp, metallic tang of gun oil. Leora Corwin moved with a frantic economy of motion, extinguishing the last of the embers in the stove. Smoke was a signal, and light was a target. "Boy," she hissed, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. "What is your name?" The boy sat on the floor, his back pressed against the rough logs. He watched her reload the Winchester, his dark eyes tracking the brass cartridges as they slid into the loading gate. "Peter," he whispered. It was barely a sound, a breath of wind. "Peter," Leora repeated. "All right, Peter, you take this." She pulled a long-bladed skinning knife from her belt and slid it across the floorboards to him. It was a heavy blade, forged from a file, sharp enough to shave with. Peter grabbed it, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the handle. He didn't look like a child anymore. The fear had crystallized into a cold, hard focus. Outside, the wind shifted. The howling gale dropped to a low moan, and in that lull, Leora heard the crunch of snow. Thaddeus Holt wasn't a military tactician, but he was a man driven by greed, and now by desperation. He had seen the ring of Comanches. He knew, just as Leora did, that the warriors were a wall. If Holt turned and ran, the warriors would cut him down for cowardice or sport. His only safety lay inside that cabin, with the boy as a hostage to barter for his life. "Spread out!" Holt's voice cracked from the tree line, about 200 yards out. "Dutch, you take the left flank. Hiram, circle round the back. Keep your heads down." Leora positioned herself at the front window, peeling back the oilskin covering just an inch. The snow acted as a reflector, casting a ghostly, ambient light over the yard. She saw them, 3 shadows detaching from the brush. They were moving fast, hunched over, using the stumps of the cleared yard for cover. Leora didn't fire. Not yet. Ammunition was life, and she had only 3 boxes. She waited until the lead man, a spindly figure named Hiram, who she'd seen drunk in Tascosa more times than she could count, reached the horse trough 50 yards out. Hiram raised a pistol, firing blindly at the cabin. The bullet thwacked harmlessly into the logs, sending a spray of splinters into the room. "Get down, Peter," Leora ordered. She rested the barrel of the Winchester on the windowsill. She took a breath, letting it out slowly to steady the tremor in her hands. She aimed not at Hiram, but at the water barrel beside him. Crack! The bullet punched through the oak staves of the barrel. Water and ice exploded outward, soaking Hiram's legs. He yelped, distracted, slipping on the instant slush. Leora racked the lever. Clack, clack. Her second shot took his hat off, spinning it into the snow. It was a warning shot, but barely. It grazed his scalp, drawing a line of blood. Hiram scrambled back, diving behind the trough, screaming, "She's got a repeater! She's awake! Push up, you cowards!" Holt roared from the rear. "There's one woman in there! One!" A heavy boom echoed from the left. A shotgun. The window shutter exploded inward, showering Leora with glass and wood. She threw her arm up to shield her face, feeling a stinging slice on her cheek. "Dutch!" Galloway had crept up the blind side of the porch. Leora dropped to the floor, rolling toward the overturned table. "Peter, watch the back door! Watch the latch!" She heard heavy boots stomping on the porch boards. Dutch was big, a brute of a man who enjoyed hurting things. He kicked the front door. The heavy oak shuddered, but the bar held. He kicked again. Thud. Dust fell from the ceiling rafters. Leora lay prone, aiming the rifle at the center of the door, right where a man's gut would be. "Open up, widow!" Dutch screamed, "or I'll peel the hide off you!" He fired the second barrel of his shotgun into the door lock. The iron mechanism shattered, but the internal bar, a 4-inch beam of hickory, held fast. Leora shifted her aim. She didn't shoot through the door. The wood was too thick. It might deflect the bullet. Instead, she aimed at the floorboards near the threshold. She fired 3 rounds in rapid succession. Bang! 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 The bullets chewed through the pine floor and angled upward through the porch decking. A scream of agony ripped through the night. Dutch dropped his shotgun. The angle had been perfect. She had caught him in the feet or shins. "My leg! Damn it, she shot my leg! Drag him back!" Holt yelled. Gunfire erupted from the tree line. Holt and the remaining men opened up with everything they had, a chaotic fusillade meant to suppress Leora, while they retrieved their wounded man. Bullets hammered the cabin like hail, punching through the chinking, shattering crockery on the shelves, and pinging off the cast-iron stove. Leora curled into a ball behind the oak table, covering her ears. Peter was under the bed, the knife held outward, his eyes wide but unblinking. The barrage lasted for a full minute, then tapered off. Leora crawled forward, her ears ringing. She risked a glance out the shattered window. Dutch was gone, a smear of blood in the snow marking his retreat. But as her eyes lifted beyond the yard, she saw the true horror of the night. The Comanches hadn't moved. 50 mounted warriors sat in a perfect circle just beyond the range of the gunfire. They were watching the spectacle with the dispassionate interest of men watching a cockfight. They didn't care about Holt. They didn't care about the noise. They were waiting to see if the spirit of the wolf was strong in the woman. One warrior, seated on a spotted pony, held a torch. He raised it high, illuminating the carnage, then lowered it. It was a signal. The first round is over. Begin the second. Leora wiped the blood from her cheek. She looked at Peter. "They aren't going to stop," she said, her voice raspy. "Holt knows he's dead if he doesn't get you. He's going to get desperate." Peter crawled out from under the bed. He pointed to the ceiling. "Fire!" he said. Leora's heart stopped. Of course, they couldn't breach the walls, so they would burn the roof. Thaddeus Holt was sweating despite the freezing temperature. He crouched behind a fallen log, looking at the bloody ruin of Dutch's ankle. "Bind it up," Holt snapped at the other men, "and stop whining." He looked at the ridge. The Indians were still there. The silence of the Comanche circle was unnerving his men more than the gunfire. It was unnatural. Why didn't they attack? "They're toying with us," whispered Ezekiel, a young hired gun who looked ready to vomit. "They want us to kill the woman so they don't have to break the truce. Then they'll kill us." "Shut up," Holt hissed. "We get the boy. We have a shield. Iron Shirt won't fire on his own blood. We grab the kid. We ride out right through their line. They'll part like the Red Sea." "We can't get in," Ezekiel argued. "She's a demon with that rifle." "She's in a wooden box," Holt said, a cruel smile touching his lips. "And Woodburn's." He turned to the wagon they had left near the trees. "Get the coal oil from the lanterns. Rag the arrows." Back in the cabin, Leora was already moving. She knew the layout of her home better than she knew the lines on her own palms. The roof was made of sod laid over timber, hard to burn, but not impossible if the fire was hot enough. The weak point was the chimney gap and the overhang of the porch. "Peter, I need water," she said. There was a bucket near the stove, half full. She grabbed a heavy woolen blanket from the bed and dunked it into the water, soaking it through. "If they throw fire, we beat it out. If the roof goes up—" She didn't finish the sentence. If the roof went up, they would be flushed out, like rabbits, into the waiting jaws of the wolves, human and animal alike. A thwack sounded against the roof, then another. Leora looked up. Through the cracks in the boards, she saw a flickering orange glow. "Arrows," she muttered. "Damn them!" She grabbed a stool, placing it on top of the table. She climbed up, using the butt of her rifle to hammer at the ceiling board where the glow was brightest. The sod was frozen, but the dry timber underneath was catching. She pushed the wet blanket up against the wood, hissing as steam rolled down. "More!" she yelled to Peter. The boy was already moving. He couldn't reach the bucket, so he grabbed the coffee pot, cold now, and tossed it up to her. Leora caught it, splashing the dregs onto the smouldering wood. But then came a sound that froze her blood. The sound of a heavy wagon wheel squeaking. Leora jumped down from the table and ran to the window. Holt's men were pushing their supply wagon backward toward the cabin. They had piled brush and dry wood into the bed of it and set it ablaze. It was a rolling wall of fire, a battering ram of heat. They were using the wagon itself as a shield against her bullets, pushing it straight for the front door. "Smart," Leora breathed. "Evil, but smart." If they jammed the burning wagon against the porch, the whole front of the cabin would catch. The heat would cook them alive in minutes. Leora raised her rifle, aiming for the legs of the men pushing the wagon, but she couldn't see them. They were ducked low behind the tailgate, completely shielded by the bulk of the wagon and the roaring fire. The wagon was 30 yards away. 20. "Peter, get the powder," Leora commanded. Her husband, Thomas, had used black powder for stump removal. There was a canister of it, 5 pounds of coarse grain blasting powder, sitting on the top shelf. Peter climbed the shelves like a squirrel, grabbing the red tin canister. He handed it to her. Leora grabbed a length of fuse cord from the tool chest. She jammed it into the tin, packing it tight with a piece of cloth. "Open the back shutter," she told Peter. "Back?" Peter looked confused. The wagon was in the front. "Just do it!" Peter unlatched the rear shutter. A blast of cold air hit them. Leora didn't run out the back. She ran to the front door. She lifted the heavy bar she had relied on for safety. She took a deep breath. She was about to do something suicidal. She cracked the door open. The heat from the approaching wagon was already palpable, a wall of orange light illuminating the snow. The wagon was 10 yards away now, moving slowly. Leora lit the fuse with a lucifer match. It sputtered and hissed. She didn't throw it. Not yet. She waited until she heard the grunt of the men pushing, until she could smell the burning varnish of the wagon sides. 5 yards. Leora kicked the door wide open. The sudden draft fed the fire, causing it to roar. The men behind the wagon yelled in surprise, seeing the woman standing there in the doorway, framed by the darkness of the cabin. Holt peeked his head around the side of the wagon, pistol raised. "Drop it!" Leora stepped out onto the porch. She swung the heavy canister of powder in an underhand arc. It sailed through the air, clearing the top of the burning brush in the wagon bed, and landed with a heavy clunk right in the center of the inferno. "Run!" Leora screamed, diving backward into the cabin. She hit the floor and kicked the door shut, just as the world turned white. Kaboom! The concussion was massive. The 5 pounds of powder didn't just explode, it vaporized the wagon. The blast wave hit the cabin like a giant fist, blowing the door off its hinges and sending it flying into the room. The windows shattered completely. The stovepipe collapsed with a clang. Leora was deafened, her ears ringing with a high-pitched whine. Debris rained down on her, splinters, burning wood, and snow. She coughed, waving her hand through the dust. "Peter." A small hand grabbed her arm. Peter was there, covered in soot, but alive. Leora stumbled to her feet, grabbing her rifle from the floor. She walked to the gaping hole where her door used to be. The wagon was gone. In its place was a smoking crater in the snow and scattered, burning wreckage. Holt's men were scattered. 2 were lying motionless in the snow, knocked cold or dead by the blast. The others were staggering around, dazed, their coats smoking. Holt was on his knees, blood running from his nose and ears. The blast had thrown him 10 feet backward. He was trying to lift his pistol, but his hand was shaking so badly he couldn't aim. Leora walked out onto the ruined porch. She didn't raise her rifle. She didn't need to. From the darkness, the circle began to move. The Comanches weren't watching anymore. The test of the siege was over. The negotiation phase had begun. But it wasn't the warriors who approached first. It was the wolves. Driven by the smell of fresh blood and the chaos, the pack had returned. They emerged from the shadows of the tree line, their eyes reflecting the dying firelight. They weren't looking at the cabin. They were looking at the men staggering in the snow. Holt saw them. He saw the grey shapes moving in. He screamed, a high, terrified sound that cut through the ringing in Leora's ears. "Help me!" Holt shrieked, looking at Leora. "For God's sake, woman, let me in!" Leora looked at the man who had tried to sell a child. She looked at the burning wreckage of her winter supplies. She looked at Peter, who was standing beside her, holding the file knife. She looked at Holt. "Circle's closed, Thaddeus," she said softly. She stepped back inside the cabin and pulled the heavy oak table across the open doorway, blocking the view. Outside, the screaming started. It didn't last long. Leora sat down on the floor, leaning against the logs. She was exhausted. Her home was half destroyed. The cold was pouring in, and she had 50 Comanche warriors waiting for her to emerge. She looked at Peter. The boy walked over to the ruined stove. He found a piece of charcoal. On the whitewashed wall of the cabin, he drew a symbol, a circle, with a line through it. "Morning comes," Peter said. Leora looked out the shattered window. To the east, a thin line of grey was bleeding into the black sky. The sun was rising. She had survived the night. But now, she had to face Iron Shirt. The sun rose over the panhandle like a bruised plum, spilling weak violet light across a landscape that had been transformed into a charnel house. The wind had finally died, leaving a silence so absolute it rang in the ears. Leora Corwin stepped through the shattered remains of her doorframe. The air smelled of sulphur, wet ash, and the copper tang of blood. Her boots crunched on the debris of the night, shards of glass, spent brass casings, and the blackened iron skeletons of the wagon wheels. She did not look at the snowdrifts where Holt and his men had fallen. The mounds were still, disturbed only by the paw prints of the pack that had come and gone in the night. The wolves had taken their toll and vanished back into the breaks, ghosts of the prairie fed by the folly of men. Leora held her Winchester at her side, barrel pointing down. She wasn't surrendering, but she wasn't attacking. She was simply presenting herself. Behind her, Peter stepped into the light. The boy had washed the soot from his face, though his tunic was still stained with the grime of his captivity. He stood tall, favoring his good leg, imitating the posture of the woman who had saved him. The circle was still there. 50 Comanche warriors sat on their ponies, motionless as the caprock itself. The frost had settled on the manes of their horses and the buffalo hide robes across their shoulders, making them look like spirits risen from the earth. Iron Shirt sat in the center. He had not moved all night. As Leora stepped onto the porch, the war chief nudged his horse forward. The animal, a massive roan with a white handprint painted on its flank, stepped high over the snow-covered body of Dutch Galloway, without breaking stride. Iron Shirt stopped 5 paces from Leora. Up close, he was terrifying. His face was a road map of the frontier wars. A jagged scar ran from his temple to his jaw, and his eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly unreadable. He wore a breastplate made of bone hair pipes, and a heavy revolver tucked into a sash. He didn't speak to Leora. He looked past her, at the boy. "Peter Nokona," Iron Shirt said. The name wasn't a question. It was an affirmation. Peter stepped forward. He spoke in Comanche, his voice high but steady. He gestured to the shack, to the crater where the wagon had been, and then, with a sharp thrust of his hand, to Leora. Leora didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. The boy was giving a report. He was testifying. Iron Shirt listened, his gaze shifting back to Leora. He looked at the bandage on her cheek, the soot in her hair, and the lever-action rifle gripped in her hand. Finally, the chief dismounted. The sound of his moccasins hitting the frozen earth was the only noise in the valley. He walked up the steps of the porch. He towered over Leora, smelling of wood smoke and leather. He reached out a hand, gloved in buckskin. Leora flinched, her finger tightening on the trigger guard, but she didn't raise the rifle. Iron Shirt didn't strike her. He reached past her shoulder and touched the doorframe, where a bullet from Holt's men had buried itself deep in the wood, inches from where Leora's head would have been. He dug his fingernail into the hole, dislodging the lead slug. He held the bullet up to the light, then dropped it into the snow. "You fight like a badger," Iron Shirt said, his English guttural but clear. "Cornered. Vicious." "I fight for what's mine," Leora replied, her voice steady. "And I don't take kindly to men who put irons on children." Iron Shirt's eyes narrowed. He looked down at Peter's ankle, where the raw red ring of the shackle was visible above the moccasin. The chief knelt, his movements fluid. He ran a thumb over the wound, When he stood up, the indifference was gone from his face. In its place was a cold, simmering rage that made the violence of the night seem like child's play. "The fat man," Iron Shirt said, referring to Holt. "He is dead?" "The powder took him," Leora said, "and the wolves took what was left." "Good. His scalp would have been filth to touch." Iron Shirt turned to his warriors. He raised his arm and made a chopping motion. The tension in the circle broke. The warriors lowered their lances. Several of them began to trill, a low, warbling sound of approval. They weren't cheering for Peter. They were cheering for Leora. Iron Shirt turned back to her. "The boy is my sister's son. He was taken 3 moons ago during the chaotic crossing of the Red River. We have hunted the bluecoats and the traders across the staked plains for him." He paused, looking at the ruin of her cabin. The roof was scorched, the windows gone, the door shattered. The winter wind was already whistling through the gaps. "You have no roof, woman of iron hair. You have no door. The winter is long." "I've rebuilt before," Leora said stubbornly. "I'll do it again." Iron Shirt shook his head slowly. "No, you will not." He pointed to the south, toward the horizon. "Listen." Leora frowned. She cocked her head. At first she heard nothing. Then, carried on the thin morning air, she heard it. A bugle. It was faint, miles away, but unmistakable. The bright, brassy call of the U.S. cavalry. The explosion, Leora realized, her stomach dropping. They heard the powder. "The bluecoats come," Iron Shirt confirmed. "They come for the fat man. He was a thief, yes, but he was their thief. He supplied the forts. When they find him dead, when they find his men scattered and eaten," he looked at Leora with a grim certainty, "they will not see a woman who defended a child. They will see a white woman who stood with Comanche against white men. They will see a traitor. They will hang you, Leora Corwin. Or they will burn what is left of this house with you inside it." Leora felt the blood drain from her face. She knew he was right. The mood on the frontier was poisonous. The army was under pressure to crush the Indian problem and anyone sympathizing with them. A widow standing over the bodies of government contractors with a Comanche war party nearby. There would be no trial. "I didn't choose this," Leora whispered. "The storm does not choose where the lightning strikes," Iron Shirt said. "But the tree must choose to burn or to bend." He walked to his horse and pulled a blanket from the saddle roll. It was a heavy buffalo robe, painted with the story of a hunt. He draped it over the porch railing. "The debt is blood," he said. "You saved the blood of my people. Now my people offer you blood." He gestured to a riderless horse, a spare mount, a sturdy paint mare that had been tethered to one of the warriors' ponies. "Ride with us," Iron Shirt said, "to the canyon lands. The bluecoats cannot follow where we go. In the spring, when the grass is tall, you can go where you wish. But if you stay here," he looked at the approaching dust cloud on the horizon, "you stay to die." Leora looked at the graves of her husband and son, barely visible under the snow. Then at the dust cloud rising in the south. The U.S. cavalry was less than an hour away. "If you stay," Iron Shirt said, his voice low, "you hang. They will not see a woman who saved a child. They will see a white woman who stood with Comanche against government contractors. They will see a traitor." Leora knew he was right. The frontier had no mercy for grey areas. She went inside the ruined shell of her cabin one last time. She pried up the loose floorboard, ignoring the land deed. Instead, she took Thomas's wedding ring and a fading, tin-type photograph of her family. She tucked them inside her shirt, next to her heart. She walked out and swung onto the paint mare Iron Shirt had offered. She shoved her Winchester into the scabbard. "Burn it," she said. Iron Shirt raised an eyebrow. If they find it standing, they'll think I'm hiding, Leora said, her voice hollow. If they find it burned, they'll assume the Comanches killed me. They won't hunt me. They'll hunt a ghost. Iron Shirt nodded. He signaled his men. Torches were thrown into the broken windows, feeding on the spilled oil and dry pine. As the war party rode west, dissolving into the landscape, Leora looked back only once. Her past was a pillar of black smoke rising against the pale morning sky. Leora Corwin was dead. The woman who rode west was someone else, entirely. They rode hard for 3 days, pushing deep into the jagged scar of the Palo Duro Canyon, a place where the maps of white men were blank. On the 3rd night, sheltered in a red-walled box canyon, the adrenaline finally faded. Peter sat between them by the fire, stitching a piece of leather. He looked different now, harder, focused. "He needs a new name," Leora said, breaking the silence. "He died in that snow, same as me." Iron Shirt watched her, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. "What do you call him?" Leora remembered the boy holding the stick against the alpha wolf and the fuse he had lit to save them all. "Little Spark," she said. Iron Shirt nodded. "Tabernanica," he translated. "It is a good name." He pointed a calloused finger at her. "And you. The wolves did not touch you. The fire did not burn you. You are Quavu." "What does it mean?" "The one who bites back." It was a moment of peace, but it was fragile. As the fire died down, a scout rode into camp, his horse lathered and blowing hard. He spoke rapidly to the chief in hushed, urgent tones. Iron Shirt's face hardened. He stood up, kicking dirt over the embers. "Get your rifle, Quavu," he said. "What is it?" Leora stood, gripping her Winchester. "The soldiers?" "No," Iron Shirt said, checking the cylinder of his revolver. "Worse, Texas Rangers, and they have a tracker." Leora froze. The army was bureaucratic and slow. The Rangers were relentless bloodhounds. "Who are they tracking?" Leora asked. Iron Shirt looked at her, and specifically at the custom floral carving on the stock of her rifle. "They found the wolf carcass by the creek," he said grimly. "They dug the bullet out of the bone. They are not tracking a kidnapped woman, Leora. They are tracking the rifle that killed the alpha." Leora's blood ran cold. They weren't coming to rescue her. They knew she was alive, and they knew she was armed. "They know," she whispered. "Ride," Iron Shirt commanded, swinging onto his horse. "The circle forms again, but this time we are on the outside." The Palo Duro Canyon was a jagged wound in the Texas Panhandle, a fortress of red clay and shadows. But today, it was a trap. Leora Corwin lay prone on a high sandstone shelf, the heat of the rock soaking through her deerskin tunic. Below, a mile down the winding floor, a column of dust signaled the end of running. "They are coming," Peter whispered. The boy lay beside her, no longer the trembling child of the wolf night. He held a small ashwood bow, his eyes sharp and hard. "I see them," Leora said. Leading the riders was Lieutenant John B. Armstrong. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a hunter. He hadn't chased a vague report of a burning cabin. He had found the alpha wolf's carcass, dug the bullet from the bone, and recognized the unique rifling twist of a custom barrel. He was tracking Thomas Corwin's gun. Iron Shirt crawled up beside them. The war chief looked gaunt, the winter chase having stripped the flesh from men and horses alike. "The walls are steep. The northern trail is blocked by scree. We fight here." "If we fight, we die," Leora said, adjusting her sights. "There are 20 of them. 12 of us." "Then we die well," Iron Shirt replied. Leora looked at Peter. "He doesn't have to." She turned to the chief, her voice dropping to a command. Armstrong wants me. He wants the prestige of hanging the traitor woman. Take the boy, take the horses. Go up the scree slope on foot. It's too steep for riders, but you can make it. You are one woman, Ironshirt argued. Leora chambered around. I am Quavu, and the circle is mine to close. Ironshirt hesitated, then placed a hand on her shoulder. If you reach the spirit land before me, tell the ancestors I am coming. He grabbed Peter's arm. No, Leora! The boy cried, struggling. Go, little spark, Leora said, eyes fixed on the approaching dust. Go and be the fire. They vanished into the scrub. Leora was alone. She had 34 bullets to buy them an hour. Armstrong rode into view, scanning the cliffs. He knew she was there. Leora took a breath, aimed not at the men, but at a loose formation of shale above their path. Crack! The rock shattered. A landslide of stone and dust cascaded down, spooking the rangers' horses. As the animals reared, Leora worked the lever. Clack, clack! She put a second bullet into the dirt inches from Armstrong's mount. Cover! Armstrong roared. She's high up! Spread out! Leora fired in a rhythm. Bang! Clack, clack, bang! She pinned them down, shattering rifle stocks and kicking up dust, making one gun sound like a platoon. The rangers scrambled for the boulders, forced to dismount and begin the slow, lethal climb up the canyon walls to flank her. 10 minutes passed, then 30. Her barrel grew hot to the touch. Give it up, Leora! Armstrong yelled from the cover of a drawer. It's over! You have a duty to your race. My duty is to the innocent, she screamed back, firing to keep his head down. But she couldn't watch every angle. A ranger on the far right flank found a line of sight. Boom! The heavy slug from a buffalo gun spun Leora around, slamming her against the sandstone. Pain, white and blinding, exploded in her left shoulder. She gasped, sliding down the rock face, her arm hanging useless. I have a hit! The ranger yelled. She's down! Leora dragged herself back to the ledge, slipping on her own blood. She looked north. The scree slope was empty. They were gone. She slumped against the rock, vision blurring. She had one bullet left. Armstrong and his men were cresting the ridge now. They would take her, parade her, and put Thomas's rifle in a museum as the weapon of a traitor. They would use her to justify hunting Peter. No, she whispered. She didn't aim at the rangers. She wedged the lever of the Winchester into a crack in the stone. She picked up a heavy rock with her good hand. Armstrong reached the ledge. He saw her. Pale, bloody, defiant. Don't do it, Leora. The circle is closed, she said. She slammed the rock down. The rifle's receiver crumpled, the delicate internal springs shattering. She smashed the stock, splitting the floral carving, and with a final heave, shoved the ruined metal over the cliff edge. It clattered 800 feet, down into the dark fissure of the earth. Take me, she rasped, but you will never have the gun. She collapsed, darkness taking her. Armstrong stood over her, breathing hard. He looked at the shattered woman, then at the empty northern slope. He knew the boy was gone. He knew that if he dragged her back, she would hang, and a martyr would be born. He holstered his pistol. Where is she? A deputy asked, scrambling up behind him. Did we get her? Armstrong looked at the unconscious woman. He looked at the deputy with eyes hard as flint. She's dead, Armstrong lied. The deputy blinked. Sir, she looks... I said she's dead, Armstrong barked. Exposure, wolves, died days ago. This is just a body we found too late. He picked up his own canteen and placed it gently beside her. We leave her to the canyon. It's where she belongs. The rangers turned and descended, leaving the Palo Duro to its silence. Leora Corwin did not die on that ledge. When the moon rose, shadows detached themselves from the northern slope. Iron Shirt had not left. He had waited. They returned for her, carrying her broken body up the impossible cliffs, binding her wounds with sage and ancient songs. History records that Leora Corwin vanished in the winter of 1874. The official report filed by Lieutenant Armstrong listed her as deceased, causes unknown. Thaddeus Holt was a casualty of an accident. The boy, Peter, was never mentioned. But the West is not written in ink. It is written in whispers. In the years that followed, cowboys on the goodnight-loving trail spoke of a rider watching from the high ridges, a figure wrapped in a buffalo robe on a paint mare. They said if a blizzard struck or a wolf pack circled your camp, a single rifle shot would ring out from the dark, saving you. They said the shooter never missed. They called her the Wolf Mother. Petanocona grew strong. He did not become a war chief, for the war was over. He became a peacemaker, a man who walked between worlds. To his grandchildren, he told the story of the circle. He told them that blood is not always what you are born with. Sometimes it is what you bleed together. Leora never returned to the world of towns and trains. She found a new family in the vast silence of the plains. She had lost a son to the frontier, but in the fire and the snow, she had found another. The West was tamed, but in the deep canyons where the wind still howls, the spirit of Quavu remains, untamed, unbroken, and waiting. And that is the legend of the Wolf Mother and the Night of the Circle. Leora Corwin wasn't a hero in the history books. She was a ghost in the margins. She proved that when the world forms a circle to crush you, you don't have to break. You just have to become the center of the storm. If this story gave you chills, do me a huge favor and smash that like button. It helps these lost legends find a new audience. And I have a question for you. If you were Lieutenant Armstrong, standing on that ledge, would you have walked away? Or would you have done your duty? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. We drop a new tale from the Wild West every week. Until next time, keep your powder dry.